to start another, let's change this down. I am doing another get ready with me discussion video. And I like these to be as informal as possible, which is why I'm standing in the camera with my hair in my hand. I just washed it not too long ago. It needed to be washed, and my daughter was taking a nap, so it was the perfect time for me to wash my hair. And I'm about to go to the store, so I need to look somewhat decent, halfway decent, something like that. And as you can see from the title of this video, I wanted to tell people to stop saying that their libraries suck. So I'm not gonna, this is not a call out video, this is not a video to embarrass anybody, because I know a lot of people who have said that their library sucks. And when they're saying their library sucks, they don't mean the people or anything like that. They're saying that their library sucks because of the lack of materials that they have. And I was talking about this with my coworker the other day, and I was telling them that I feel like when you don't work in a library, it's very easy to say stuff like, libraries suck, or I don't understand why they don't have this, I don't understand why they don't have that, my library doesn't have materials. But when you work in a library and you work on the inside, you kind of know, you get the full-blown story. You get the full shebang. You know exactly what's going on. You know exactly how libraries get their materials, and why sometimes it seems like libraries don't have a lot. So in my area, because I can't speak for everybody, if you want to know more, you're probably going to have to end up doing research about your specific area. But in my specific area, I can tell you that our library is funded by taxes, which I believe most libraries are funded by taxes. And I think some libraries may get funding from their state library. Some people may get money from the federal government, whatever the case may be. But if you want to know how your library gets funding, I would suggest that you do some research and you ask your library. They have to give you that information. It is public knowledge. It's not something that they can hide from you, because it's your right as a patron to know how money is being spent. Okay? In my library, we get our money from county taxes. So whoever lives in our county and pays taxes, which is a high-paying tax county, I know that because I pay taxes on the county in which I work. That's how we acquire our funds. So we get a percentage. The county council approves what percentage of those taxes we get, and that's how we get our funding. That's how we get paid. That's how we pay for programming. That's how we acquire our materials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about material acquisition. Okay? I think there's this misconception that libraries can just buy any book that they want. They cannot. Okay? We all work on some sort of budget. Every library has a collection development department. Okay? And that collection development department has to make the very difficult decision of determining what books can and cannot get added to your collection. Okay? And that all has to do with the budget they have. They have to think about the books that are going to circulate the most, and all that stuff. So, for instance, we have a very large budget for our collection development, okay? One of the largest. So, we have a budget where we can get like New York Times best-selling books, and we can get the latest books that are produced by the latest authors and stuff like that. But then that too also depends on vendors. There's a certain way that we have to spend our funds. And if our vendors don't have the book, we can't get it. So like, for example, I wanted us to get a copy of Heartstopper, but because our vendor doesn't have it, what ended up happening is that we couldn't acquire it. So that's what I'm saying, is that there are limitations to what libraries can and cannot do as far as purchasing materials. So it kind of disappoints me when I hear people say like, oh, my library sucks, they don't have anything. Well, before you say stuff like that, y'all, A, do your research and find out how your library is getting money. B, if you have an issue with your library not having materials, advocate for them. Talk to your politicians. Talk to your city or county council. However your library gets their money, you have to advocate for them to continue to get funds or to get more funds so they can have materials that are great, that are not, you know, like 4 or 5 years old and they don't have the best sellers or whatever the case may be. You have to be willing to advocate and to talk instead of just saying, oh, well, my library sucks. Because that really doesn't help anybody. In addition to that, you know, material selection is not as easy as you think. So a book that you may think is popular, the library can look at whatever system they have. Our system is called Polaris, and we can kind of figure out whether that book is going to circulate or not. If the book is not going to circulate, meaning that it's not going to exchange the hands of a lot of people, that ultimately means that that we won't buy it. It's not a likelihood that anybody is going to pick that book up, and in that essence, that's a waste of money. And I'm also talking about this from experience, because we do purchase books from my location underneath our collection development department. So I know what it's like to go through and have to figure out whether that book is going to circulate or not. You can't just get every book that comes out, because 9 times out of 10, a library is not going to have the budget for that. They're not going to have the means to pay for all those materials. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. And I know a lot of libraries try to keep as much materials as they can, but sometimes, y'all, they just can't afford to do it because it's so expensive. It's such an expensive thing to do. You know, you think about how much we pay for books, how much a hardcover adult book costs, okay? And then imagine having to pay for multiple copies of that book. That adds up. That's a lot of money. And a lot of times I don't think people realize how much money that is, even when it comes to audiobooks, y'all, okay? Audiobooks are not as cheap as y'all think. I'm sure people realize like how expensive they are, but they're super, super, super expensive, okay? And I'm just talking about in terms of like when you buy the CDs. Those can run you anywhere from $30 to $50 a piece. But not even talking about that, like going more so too into like the stuff, like ebooks, audiobooks, okay? So I know a lot of us on here talk about using things like Hoopla and Libby/Overdrive. Libby and Overdrive are the same company. Libby's just more user-friendly. Their interface is better than Overdrive. At least in my opinion, I think it's better. I use Libby over Overdrive. I don't think a lot of people realize how ebooks work, okay? It's licensing, meaning that when a library buys an ebook or an audiobook, it's not theirs to keep. What ends up happening is that the 5 major publishing houses, okay, what they do is they give them the lease, okay? And then they have a certain amount of checkouts that book can be used for until that lease is up. So for example, let's say we talk about Lee Bardugo's book, Ninth House, okay? So they buy the ebook for Ninth House from whoever published that book, okay? That publisher is only going to give a library X amount of checkouts, meaning that, let's say you buy a copy of that book, the publishing house may say, okay, well, you know, you could only allow this book to be checked out 52 times, and then after that, you have to renew your lease. And that's the way that it works. So imagine if 200 people want to read that book. Like, it gets really, it gets a lot more expensive than what people get, than people realize. Same thing with audiobooks. There's a limit. And then same thing with Hoopla. Libraries have to strategically figure out how many checkouts they're willing to pay for the average customer for a year. That's all budgeted out. It is a crazy concept. And then if you guys did not know, which I'm pretty sure majority of the booktube community doesn't know this, Macmillan created what we call an embargo on libraries recently, okay? What they said is that libraries are hurting their ebook market, and they're hurting their authors, and they're preventing these people from getting, authors from getting the sufficient amount of money that they need, okay? So what Macmillan has decided to do is they created an embargo, which means that when it comes to popular books, like New York Times best-selling books, or any book at all, any new releases, you can only get one copy of the book, one digital copy of the book, not physical copy. Physical copies haven't changed. Digital copies, you can only get one copy. That creates issues, y'all, because what ends up happening is that, let's say, for example, Stephen King comes out with a new book, okay? Or we could even use something that has come out, Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, okay? Hundreds of people want to read that book. Hundreds of people would like to use their library to read that book, okay? Some people cannot read physical books. Some people prefer to read e-copies of books. But because an embargo has been placed, and I'm not saying that Ta-Nehisi Coates' book has been produced or published by Macmillan, I'm just using it as an example. What ends up happening in that situation is that only one copy can get purchased. That means you have over 100 people waiting in line to use that one copy. And that's problematic because for us as librarians, that's an issue of access. People may not be able to afford to read that book. And because they can't afford to read that book and they rely on us maybe for a digital copy, they have to wait weeks and weeks. For us, you could check out a book for 3 weeks. So imagine 100 people waiting for one copy of a book for 6 months because we can't purchase any more copies of that book for 6 months. You could only have one copy, okay? So my point is, and I can do a whole nother video if you guys would like, because I think I probably need to explain that better, but I don't really have the time right now to explain it the way I want to explain it. The way that is working right now basically stops library patrons from being able to access materials the way that we would like our patrons to be able to access materials, okay? So my whole point of it is basically going back to saying, like, I know people don't mean any harm, but it's kind of hard for me to hear people say stuff like, like my library selection sucks, when, you may not mean any harm, you may not mean anything by it, but for me, it's a little different because I know exactly how it works on the inside. And it's particularly hard for me to hear that because sometimes, and most of the time, if not all the time, it's not the fault of the library that has happened. They may have restriction in terms of funding. They may be having access issues because of publishers, like there's a lot that goes into it. And I kind of just wanted you guys to be aware of the fact that libraries don't not have materials because they don't want to have materials. It's usually some barrier in the way in which they can't get materials. And, it's a huge thing right now talking about ebook materials in the librarian world because of the fact that publishing companies now are trying to limit the access and the amount of materials that libraries can get. And for us, that's an access issue. People don't have money to buy books from publishers, and that's why libraries exist, to assist people in getting access to materials that otherwise may be a barrier for them, or there may be a barrier in place. So, sometimes it's kind of hard to hear when people say that, when like libraries are trying their darndest to be as efficient as possible. And I always tell people, like, support your library. I know that, as a booktube community, we like purchasing books. We like having books in her collection, but you know, also if you can, support your library, because the numbers that, you know, when you guys check out stuff, and you even when you check out stuff like e-audio and ebooks, like those numbers help, because that's proof that, you know, that y'all are using the library in a lot of ways. A lot of libraries can end up requesting more funding, and they could use those numbers as proof as to why they need more funding, because of the fact that they have all these people checking out library materials. So I guess my point is, before you say your library has a crappy selection, it doesn't change that the selection may not be great, but you know, do yourself a favor and educate yourself as to why the selection may not be great. Educate yourself as to why your library may have to do a lot of interlibrary loans, meaning that they have to request stuff from other locations, you know, within the United States or within the county or within the state itself. Like, don't just wash them off as just not being good, because 9 times out of 10 there's a reason behind that. And you know, when you use your library and you participate and you help get those numbers up from them, it helps them be able to provide you with better services. So I just thought I would say that very, very quickly. If you guys have any questions about, if you want more in-depth answers about library acquisitions, definitely let me know in the comment box below. That's something that I do help with at my specific location where I work. And I did take a class on it, so it's super, super interesting, super fascinating, the way that money works in the library world. Like, we're nonprofit, so we have to get our money from somewhere. And a lot of that does come from either grants or funding from county, state, city, or, you know, federal government. So as always, I hope you guys like this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Click the subscribe button if you want to see more content from me. All of my social media will be down in the description box below. If you have any questions, like I said, ask below or reach out to me on one of those social media platforms. This is a conversation I feel like we should be having a little bit more on BookTube about the role that libraries play in BookTube. Because I kind of think they do, and then I kind of think they don't. It depends on who you talk to, if the booktuber's a librarian or not. Like, I don't know many. I know Sam. I'll link her channel down below. I know that she's a librarian, and I think that there is someone who just joined BookTube who focuses on romance that is also a librarian. But those are the 3 of us is the only people I know that actually work in libraries or are librarians in our booktubers. So I think we bring an interesting perspective to the community, and I wish that we could talk about that a little bit more. But I hope you, like I said, I hope you guys enjoy. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. All right, have a good day.